Hey there, and welcome to a deep dive into a fascinating topic,
Oh,
emotional intelligence,
okay.
or EQ as it's often called.
Right.
You sent over those snippets from Daniel Goleman's audiobook on this.
Yeah,
And wow, it really makes you think.
it really
This
does.
isn't just like self-help fluff.
No.
This is about unlocking a whole new level of personal and professional success.
Absolutely. Goldman really hits the nail on the head, I think, by exploring this
Hmm.
crucial aspect of human potential that I think often gets overshadowed by traditional measures of intelligence.
It's true, we often prioritize IQ.
Yeah,
But what good is a brilliant mind if you can't understand your own emotions,
right.
let alone the emotions of the people around you?
Exactly. And what makes Goldman's work so compelling is how he connects our emotions to our achievements, to our well-being, even our physical health.
Okay, so let's unpack this.
Yeah,
We're not talking about being like overly sensitive or letting emotions run wild, right?
right.
It's more about understanding and managing them effectively.
Precisely, Goldman goes beyond just basic feelings.
Oh.
He defines EQ as this intricate blend of self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills.
Hmm.
And here's the kicker.
Oh.
He argues that EQ can be developed and refined throughout life,
Okay.
unlike IQ, which is often seen as relatively fixed.
That is encouraging.
It is.
It means we can break free from those like ingrained emotional habits and actually learn to respond in healthier ways.
Yeah.
But before we dive into all that, I'm curious about this idea of emotions as survival mechanisms. It sounds almost primal, doesn't it?
It is. Imagine our ancestors facing down a saber-toothed tiger.
Right.
Fear wasn't just a feeling, it was a surge of energy that helped them escape danger.
Mm-hmm.
Anger fueled their fight for survival.
Right.
These intense emotional responses are hardwired into the oldest part of our brains, the limbic system.
So it's like we have this ancient emotional brain
Yes,
working alongside our more rational thinking brain.
exactly. And Goleman brilliantly highlights this interplay between the neocortex, responsible for logical thought, and the impulsive limbic system.
Hmm.
Now, usually they work in harmony,
Right.
but sometimes our emotional brain can hijack the rational one,
Okay.
especially when we perceive a threat.
Like in that heartbreaking story of Matilda Crabtree
Yes.
playing a prank on her father.
Precisely that tragic event is a chilling example of what Goleman calls an emotional hijacking.
Right.
The father's fear was so immediate, so intense, that it completely overwhelmed his ability to think clearly, to even recognize his own daughter.
It's a stark reminder of why self-awareness is so crucial.
Absolutely.
We need to be able to catch those emotions in the moment before they completely take over.
Exactly. It's like hitting the pause button before reacting.
Hmm.
How often do you stop and ask yourself, what am I truly feeling right now?
Right.
Without that awareness, we're like ships sailing without rudders, tossed about by every emotional wave.
And we might end up shipwrecked before we even realize what hit us.
Exactly.
So that's where self-regulation comes in.
Yes, and it's not about suppressing our emotions.
Okay.
Goleman is very clear about that. It's about managing them effectively.
Okay.
He even quotes Erasmus, the 16th century scholar,
Hmm.
who rather colorfully compared reason to a weary ruler trying to control the unruly subjects of anger and lust.
Ah, I love that analogy.
Yeah,
It paints such a vivid picture of this inner struggle.
it does.
So how do we become better emotional regulators?
What?
Are there specific techniques we can learn?
Absolutely. Goleman dives into several techniques, including cognitive reframing,
Okay.
helping others, and finding meaning in challenging situations.
Hmm.
He uses the brilliant analogy of an airplane encountering turbulence.
Oh, right. I love that analogy.
Yeah,
You're on this transatlantic flight and suddenly you hit a rough patch.
right.
You can either fixate on every bump and jolt letting anxiety take over,
Or you can zoom out.
yes,
Picture yourself soaring above those minor disturbances, focusing on the bigger picture.
right.
The ultimate goal of reaching your destination.
It's about choosing where we focus our attention, even amidst the chaos.
Exactly.
But what about those times when it's not just a temporary blip like a bumpy flight?
Right.
What about when worry and negativity become chronic?
Mm-hmm.
Those moments when those thoughts just seem to take root in our minds.
Yeah.
How do we handle that?
Ah, yes. Goleman delves into the tricky terrain of worry and rumination.
Okay.
He explains how our brains can get stuck in loops of negative thinking, often without us even realizing it.
He makes this fascinating connection between chronic worry and superstition.
Mm-hmm.
It really made me think.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate on that a bit more?
Of course, Goleman argues that worry, even though unpleasant,
Okay.
can provide us with a false sense of control.
Okay.
We convince ourselves that by mentally rehearsing potential dangers, we're somehow warding them off.
So it's like a mental good luck charm
Right.
to keep bad things from happening.
Exactly.
But if it doesn't work, why do we do it?
Because it feels like we're doing something right. But here's the catch. Chronic worry, just like superstition,
Okay.
doesn't actually solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
It often traps us in a cycle of fear and inaction.
So how do we break free from those worry traps?
Well,
Is it even possible?
it absolutely is possible.
Okay.
But it takes conscious effort.
Okay.
Goleman suggests actively challenging those negative thought patterns,
Okay.
similar to what cognitive therapists do.
Hmm.
He also emphasizes the importance of shifting our focus,
Okay.
engaging in activities that pull us out of our heads and into the present moment.
So instead of dwelling on what might go wrong,
Right.
we need to find ways to kind of calm our minds and shift our perspective.
Exactly.
Maybe through things like mindfulness exercise, connecting with loved ones.
Exactly. It's about actively cultivating emotional balance,
Mm-hmm.
not just waiting for a good mood to magically appear.
Right.
And this is where Goleman's insights on managing sadness and anxiety are so valuable.
Okay.
He provides a whole toolkit of healthy coping mechanisms.
Uh-huh.
And, sometimes it's not just about, thinking positive or toughing it out.
Right.
Recognizing when we need support,
Mm-hmm.
whether from loved ones or professionals,
Right.
is a sign of emotional intelligence in itself.
I think that's a really important point.
It is.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about another fascinating aspect of EQ,
Yeah?
empathy.
Okay.
This is where things get really interesting in terms of our relationships with others.
It really is. Empathy is more than just feeling sorry for someone.
Okay.
It's about stepping into their shoes, seeing the world through their eyes,
Mm-hmm.
understanding their perspective, even if we haven't walked their path.
And that goes way beyond just words, right?
It does.
It's about turning into those subtle cues, body language, tone of voice, facial expressions.
Yes.
It reminds me of that test Goleman mentions,
Yeah.
the PONS test.
Yes, the PNS test measures our ability to decode those nonverbal messages, which
Yeah.
are incredibly important in communication.
It's amazing how much we communicate without even saying a word. Do you have any examples of this from Goleman's work that really stood out?
One that comes to mind is the example he gives of depressed mothers and their infants.
Okay.
Even at just a few months old,
Wow.
the infants unconsciously mirror their mother's sadness, becoming more passive and withdrawn themselves.
Wow. It's like this unspoken emotional exchange is shaping their development from the very beginning.
It really highlights how significant early experiences are in shaping our emotional brains.
Right.
And sadly, Goleman also delves into the detrimental impact of neglect and abuse
Right.
on a child's capacity for empathy.
The story about little Martin in the daycare center is heartbreaking.
It truly is. Witnessing his aggressive,
Yeah.
even cruel reaction to another child's distress was a harsh reminder
Yeah.
of how early trauma can warp a child's ability to empathize.
Right.
And sadly, as Goleman's research shows, those patterns of unaddressed can have a domino effect on their future relationships and behaviors.
It makes you wonder how those early experiences might unconsciously play out in our adult relationships, especially romantic ones.
That's precisely where Goleman takes us next.
Okay.
He dissects how emotional intelligence,
Okay.
or the lack thereof,
Mm-hmm.
can make or break our closest bonds.
And he doesn't shy away from the challenging aspects of relationships.
No, he doesn't.
He talked about how our own toxic thoughts can sabotage our connections
Yes.
with the people we care about most.
He calls it the innocent victim mentality, where
Okay.
we jump to the most negative interpretation of our partner's actions,
Yeah.
which only fuels conflict and resentment.
Right.
We become so fixated on our own hurt or anger
Right.
that we miss those crucial opportunities for connection and repair.
It's so easy to fall into those traps, especially when emotions are running high.
It is.
And to complicate matters, he also talks about how men and women often respond to conflict in very different ways.
Absolutely. He cites research by Levinson,
Okay.
who found that men are more prone to stonewalling,
Okay.
withdrawing emotionally to avoid feeling overwhelmed during a disagreement, while women tend to express their feelings more openly, sometimes through criticism,
Right.
which then triggers the man's defensiveness.
It's like they're speaking completely different emotional languages.
Right.
So how do we bridge that communication gap?
Wow.
What does Goleman suggest?
He offers some really practical solutions,
Right.
and they all revolve around building healthier communication patterns.
Okay.
He talks about the power of non-defensive listening, really making a conscious effort to understand our partner's perspective,
Right.
even when it's difficult.
Right.
He also emphasizes the importance of empathetic speaking,
Okay.
which brings us back to that mirroring technique we discussed earlier.
Where one partner reflects back the other's feelings.
Right.
So they feel heard and understood.
Exactly. He also introduces this really useful communication tool
Okay.
called the XYZ complaint formula.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
It's a way of expressing your needs and feelings
Yeah.
without resorting to blame or attack. Instead of saying, you're always late, you don't care about my time,
Right.
you would say something like,
Exactly. You'd say, when you were late for a dinner date last night, I felt hurt and disrespected.
okay.
In the future, I'd appreciate it if you could call if you're going to be more than 15 minutes late.
Okay.
It shifts the focus from blame to collaboration.
It takes practice.
It does.
But it sounds like a much more effective way to address issues.
It is.
And that collaborative spirit is essential not just in our personal relationships,
Right.
but also in the workplace.
Yes.
Which brings us to another important area where Goleman says EQ really shines.
Absolutely, because in today's world, it's not enough to be brilliant.
Right.
We have to be able to work effectively with others to navigate the complexities of teamwork and collaboration.
And that's where emotional intelligence can really make a difference.
It can.
Goleman argues that EQ is essential for addressing issues like prejudice and bias, fostering a culture of respect,
Right.
and unlocking a team's full potential.
He's right. Let's start with prejudice and bias.
Okay.
Goleman doesn't sugarcoat how deeply ingrained these patterns can be.
Yeah.
He highlights their often unconscious nature, how they can operate beneath the surface,
Right.
influencing our perceptions and decisions, even when we believe we're being completely objective.
The example of the Denny's discrimination case is a stark reminder of that.
It is.
For those unfamiliar, back in 1993, 6 Black Secret Service agents were denied service at a Denny's restaurant in Maryland,
Wow.
while their white colleague was served without issue.
Yeah.
This sparked a national outcry and brought to light the pervasive issue of racial discrimination in America.
It's a powerful example of how unconscious bias can manifest
Right.
in very real and harmful ways.
Mm-hmm.
And while Goleman acknowledges the importance of things like diversity training,
Right.
he also cautions against relying solely on those types of one-off workshops.
So he's saying that genuine change requires a more comprehensive approach.
It does.
It's not just about checking boxes. It's about a fundamental shift
Yes.
in both individual behavior and organizational culture.
Precisely, he emphasizes the importance of creating a culture of respect,
Okay.
where diversity isn't just tolerated, it's genuinely valued and celebrated.
And where there's zero tolerance for any form of intolerance,
Exactly.
whether it's overt discrimination
Yeah.
or those more subtle microaggressions
Right.
that can make people feel marginalized and excluded.
He advocates for a more proactive and courageous approach to addressing bias,
Okay.
where individuals feel empowered to speak up against injustice, and where organizations actively create systems and structures that support equity and inclusion. It's not just about avoiding lawsuits.
Right.
It's about cultivating a workplace where everyone feels valued, respected, and empowered to bring their whole selves to the table.
When that happens, Goleman argues,
Yes.
it unlocks what he calls the group IQ.
Yes.
He uses the fascinating Bell Labs study to illustrate this concept.
Right. This study found that the most successful teams weren't necessarily composed of the individuals with the highest IQs,
Okay.
but rather those who worked together most harmoniously and effectively.
So it's more about the synergy of the group, the ability to leverage everyone's strengths and create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts.
Exactly. Goleman discovered that teams with high emotional intelligence,
Okay.
teams that communicated effectively, built trust, and navigated conflict constructively,
Good.
consistently outperformed groups with lower EQ, even if those groups had more individually brilliant members.
That's a powerful testament to the importance of emotional intelligence in a team setting.
It really is, and it speaks to the power of fostering a workplace culture that prioritizes not just intellectual prowess, but also emotional maturity and social awareness.
You know, it's fascinating how deeply intertwined our emotional and professional lives really are.
Yeah.
But what about the link between our emotional well-being and our physical health? We often hear about like the dangers of stress, but Goleman seems to suggest it runs much deeper than that.
It does. Goleman dives into this complex world of mind-body connections
Okay.
and presents some really compelling evidence that chronic stress, anxiety, and depression can significantly impact our physical health.
And he backs it up with concrete research,
He does.
not just anecdotal evidence.
Exactly. One study that comes to mind is Cohen's cold virus study.
Right.
They found that people under high stress were much more likely to get sick after being exposed to the virus.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And then there's all the research on the link between chronic hostility and heart disease in men.
And Goleman highlights the dangers of anxiety and fear for women, especially those who've already had a heart attack.
Right.
It's almost as if our emotional state can, strengthen or weaken our body's defenses.
It's a powerful concept.
It is.
And on the topic of defenses, Goleman emphasizes the importance of social connection
Okay.
in safeguarding our well-being. He even suggests that loneliness can be as detrimental to our health as smoking.
That's a powerful statement.
It is.
I remember him citing a Swedish study
Yeah.
that showed a significantly higher mortality risk
Right.
for isolated men.
Yeah.
It makes you appreciate the importance of those close connections.
It underscores that we are inherently social beings.
Right.
And those bonds of intimacy and support
Mm-hmm.
play a vital role in our overall health and resilience.
It's not all doom and gloom, though.
No.
Goleman also explores the power of positive emotions.
Yes.
Hope, optimism, even laughter,
Absolutely.
to help us cope with challenges and bounce back from adversity.
He highlights these qualities as antidotes to chronic stress and negativity.
Okay.
He talks about a study on heart attack survivors,
Mm-hmm.
where those with a more optimistic outlook had a much higher survival rate
Wow.
than their pessimistic counterparts.
It's amazing how a positive outlook can impact
It is.
not just our mental well-being,
Right.
but our physical health as well.
It really speaks to the power of the mind-body connection.
It does.
And this leads us to a pivotal aspect of Goleman's work.
Okay.
The idea that we can cultivate emotional intelligence in ourselves and in future generations.
Which brings us to his insights on raising emotionally intelligent children.
Yes,
He emphasizes the profound impact of early childhood experiences,
he does.
particularly how parents respond to their children's emotions.
He delves into different parenting styles and their long-term effects,
Okay.
contrasting those who dismiss or ignore their children's feelings
Right.
with those who practice emotion coaching.
And emotion coaching involves being present with our children's emotions.
Yes.
Helping them understand and manage those feelings effectively,
Right.
rather than simply trying to make them disappear.
And he paints a vivid picture of this through two contrasting baby scenarios.
Right. The first baby whose cries for comfort are met with warmth and responsiveness,
Right.
learns that her needs are valid
Mm-hmm.
and that she can rely on her caregivers.
Right.
While the second baby, whose cries are met with frustration or anger,
Right.
is left feeling overwhelmed, unseen, and alone.
And those early experiences repeated over time shape a child's emotional landscape.
It's almost like we're shaping their internal blueprints
It is.
for relationships
Yeah.
throughout their lives.
Right.
It makes you reflect on the legacy we're passing down to
Yeah.
future generations,
Mm-hmm.
not just through our genes,
Right.
but through our emotional habits and the examples we set.
It's a profound responsibility.
It is.
And Goleman doesn't let us off the hook easily.
No, he doesn't.
He discusses the cycle of aggression,
Okay.
highlighting how harsh, inconsistent discipline
Right.
can actually fuel more aggression in children.
It's a vicious cycle that can perpetuate itself across generations.
But it can.
But thankfully, Goleman offers hope.
He does.
He highlights the incredible adaptability of young minds and the power of early intervention.
Yes, he talks about the success of programs that teach emotional literacy in schools, equipping children with the tools to navigate their emotions,
Right.
build healthy relationships, and make responsible choices.
It's about setting them up for success, not just academically, but emotionally and socially as well.
Exactly.
Which brings us back to that thought-provoking question Goleman leaves us with.
Mm-hmm.
If our brains are molded by those early emotional experiences, what are we collectively teaching the next generation?
Right.
Through our own emotional habits and the examples we set.
It's a question worth pondering because the answer,
It is.
for better or worse, will shape the emotional landscape for generations to come.
It's a potent reminder that emotional intelligence isn't just about individual success.
Right.
It's about cultivating a more compassionate, empathetic,
Yes.
and emotionally healthy society for everyone.
I agree.
And on that note, we'll leave you to ponder that very thought.
Okay.
This has been quite the deep dive into the world of emotional intelligence.
It has.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.